Welcome to From the Ground Up. I'm Paula Kerman. I recently sat down with Israeli Jewish peace activist Jeff Halper. Jeff is the co-founder and director of the Israeli Committee Against House Demolitions. Jeff was recently in Edmonton as part of a cross-Canada tour. Jeff's organization helps Palestinian families rebuild their homes after they have been demolished as part of Israeli policy. So, Jeff, thank you for being on From the Ground Up today.
Thank you for having me.
How is your tour coming along so far?
It's been a journey from St. John's in Newfoundland through Halifax, all the way across Edmonton. I'm going back to Winnipeg, and then Vancouver, Victoria Island, and then a swing through the States. So it's a 5-week tour. But it's been very good.
You're originally from the States, and you moved to Israel in 1973.
That's right.
What led you there, and what sort of got you into activism for the Palestinians?
Well, I mean, first of all, I'm a child of the 60s. So I was pre-adapted to activism and so on. Part of the 60s was a return to roots. And Alex Haley's book, Roots, the African Americans, the Native Americans, Hispanics, as they were called then, going back to their roots. And I'm not religious in any way, but I got caught up in that kind of, a Jewish identity. There was an alienation from the States, too. And when the 60s collapsed, I really didn't want to stay there. And my Jewish identity was becoming important, but not in any religious sense. So when I went to Israel, actually on my way to Ethiopia, I did some research there. I'm an anthropologist. It kind of spoke to me. I liked it. I was never a Zionist. I never bought into that. As a matter of fact, the first week I was in Israel, I got into the New Left there. So I've been in the peace movement all this time. But there's some things of Israel I like. I do like that rootedness to some degree in community and in history and all of that. But certainly I never bought into Zionism and the exclusivity and the anti-Palestinian stuff. So, I've been there all these years, both as an activist, but very involved with Israeli society. I've done research on the Mizrahi Jews, Jews from Muslim countries. I was the head of the Israeli Committee for Ethiopian Jews. It came out of my research. So I've been, I was a community worker for the Jerusalem municipality for 10 years. So I've been very involved in local things in Israel as well as the political.
Can you tell us a little bit about your organization and what you do?
Well, I'm the head of the Israeli Committee Against House Demolitions, which is a political organization. And I say that because now everything's becoming NGO-ified. And you're getting the humanitarian stuff, all kinds of things that aren't very political. We keep a political focus. We're a human rights organization, a peace group, that's dedicated on the one hand to ending the occupation. We'll get into that. That used to mean a two-state solution, but we're of the opinion that that's long dead and gone. But ending the occupation and then achieving a just peace with the Palestinians in whatever form that takes. So we're an activist group. We took the issue of house demolitions as our focus because occupation can be a very general, abstract sort of a thing for people. So the house demolition issue really focuses you. There's a family, an innocent family, not terrorists. That's part of the power of it too, is that it undermines the Israeli narrative of saying everything we do is against terrorism. This is a proactive claim to displacing people and taking their land. And it really shows how the occupation works. Through a house demolition, you see what the mechanisms are, how people's homes are destroyed, how their lands are taken, how they're displaced, and what Israel's intentions are. So if Israel says we want a two-state solution, we want peace, and on the other hand they're doing what they're doing on the ground, that's crucial, then I go with what's happening on the ground. So our analysis is literally grounded in being there, in knowing what's happening on the ground. And then from there, you see, we see ourselves as actors. Not simply protesters, not simply gadflies or, but as actors in the drama. We want to help end the occupation. We want to change policy. We want to affect governments and public. And the way to do that is not directly to governments, is to get to the people and do it from the bottom up and create those pressures that then affect government policies. Not in Israel, because Israel's immune. Israel has turned this into a non-issue. So you're not going to get to the Israeli public. They're not going to rise up and overthrow the occupation. But in the international civil society. So we take our resistance, what we've learned, our analysis that comes from the ground up, maps, informational materials, analyses, articles, books, films, website, internet materials, and so on, and then we go abroad and we educate and mobilize the activists and the general public as well, in order, in the end, to create those kinds of pressures from below that ended apartheid in South Africa.
And there are some people have criticized the use of the word apartheid with regards to Israel. How do you respond to that?
Apartheid understates the situation. It's worse than apartheid. First of all, apartheid is a very easy thing to explain. It isn't a slogan. It isn't a curse. It isn't an accusation. It's a political system. There's an international law against what's called the crime of apartheid. And apartheid simply means two things. First of all, when one population separates itself from the others. That's the apartheid, separateness. And then that population creates a permanent institutionalized regime of domination. In other words, it's not just discrimination, but it's a regime. When the apartheid regime or the Israeli regime, when the regime is based on the idea of privileging one group over others, and that group dominates and controls, that's apartheid. And it doesn't matter if it's based on race, like it was in South Africa, or religion and nationalism, as it is in Israel-Palestine, or the color of your eyes. Who cares if the regime is separation and domination? But we're arguing, I write about this, I won't get into the whole thing, but that there's actually a situation worse than apartheid. And that's what's called warehousing, which is a concept that comes out of the American prison system, where basically you're simply imprisoned. I mean, in South Africa, it's hard to say a good thing about apartheid. But at least in apartheid, there was the idea of there was an idea of separate development, is the way they put it. But there was an idea that there was a Bantustan, there is another people, it was all racist and dominating, but there was that acknowledgement, at least, that the other existed. In Israel, you don't have that. In Israel, there's no Palestinians, they have no national rights, they have no civil rights, they have no claims to the land. They're inmates, like in a prison. So they're warehoused like you would warehouse prisoners. So that Israel doesn't even, I think, agree on a Bantustan. That's too much. But simply they want to imprison Palestinians, those that they can't drive out of the country. So in a sense, it not only is apartheid accurate, but like I said, it understates the case. And I would even go on to talk about warehousing.
As a Jewish person who is also Israeli and who fights for the rights of the Palestinians, how do you deal with criticism towards that from perhaps other Jewish people who may be more of a Zionist orientation?
Well, we have a concept of a PEP. Most of them are PEPs, progressive except Palestine. So here you have a Jewish community in Canada, in the U.S., and the diaspora in general, that overall is very liberal, that really takes its self-definition in a way, and its spirit, I would even say, from the prophets. The vast majority of Jews are not religious, and they're secular, and they're liberal, and they're white. And I think what defines them is a commitment to social justice and human rights. Until you come to Israel. And then all of a sudden, everything they believe in, all their values, all their, the prophetic traditions, the commitments to social justice gets thrown out of the window, and they support the worst racist, occupational violent policies. And I think there's I'm writing an article now that I'm entitling Zionism Murdered Judaism. Because Judaism has its values, it has, especially outside Israel. It hasn't been in Israel for a couple thousand years. And the prophets is where it takes its inspiration. Israel and Zionism was an attempt to take Jews and put them back in a country in a nationalist way, define them as a nation, with an army, conquering. I mean, the book of Joshua. If you read the book of Joshua, it's ISIS. God and the Jews, or the Israelites as they were with Joshua, are ISIS. They're intimidating, they're killing, they're slaughtering, they're putting salt in the ground. I mean, it's a terrible book, Joshua. That's the book that Israel's founded on. Israel is founded on diametrically opposed values, a diametrically opposed Judaism to the Judaism of the diaspora. It's not a Judaism. It's a genocidal, racist, tribal nationalism that's expressed in the 5 books of Moses and Joshua. And in Israel, for example, the religious read the Torah and Joshua, of course. They never, ever, ever read the prophets. The prophets are subversive. They're not, so you jump from that part from the Torah to the Talmud. And you don't do the prophets. Whereas here, it's the opposite. Here, in the diaspora, the Torah doesn't really mean anything. It's a tribal story of a people in another country with another whole set of calculations, a whole different concept of God, where social justice is not a part of the Torah. It's us and them, and it's killing them, and absolutes good and evil, and right and wrong. There's none of that nuanced life that Judaism is famous for. So I would say to the Jews here that you should be actually defending, legitimizing, validating your own Judaism, which is the Judaism of the diaspora with a 2,000-year history, rather than destroying it and taking on some tribal nationalism that is simply unsustainable, and it isn't you. So I think the Jews here don't really understand how they're letting Israel undermine their own culture. As a matter of fact, one of the tenets of Zionism, it's stated, is what's called the negation of the exile. From a Zionist point of view, you're not living in a diaspora. You're living on borrowed time in somebody else's country, and everything you call Jewish culture, whether it's film, or human rights, or Reform Judaism, or your symbols, or your ritual, everything is ephemeral. It means nothing until you go back to Israel and rejoin the tribe. So there's a whole negation of your life. And I think Jews here have to stand up not only for the legitimacy of Judaism, as opposed to Israeli tribalism, but also to the fact that this is a kind of Judaism that's sustainable in the world, that can be a part of a progressive world, and not this tribalism of genocide that really is reflected in Israeli policies that these same Jews are supporting.
But even going beyond the Jewish community, there are, even within Canada right now, there are policies and trying to be passed that that are trying to delegitimize legitimate criticism of Israel, and in fact vilify it, particularly BDS and other things. But just
even
in general,
make it illegal.
Exactly. But even in general, over the last few years, we have seen more and more criticism of Israel being called the new anti-Semitism, and it's coming to a head now with, for example, our government, federal government right now, trying to pass legislation that we don't even know what the effects would be, but it is particularly pointed to criticism of Israel. How do you respond to something like that?
That really makes my point of how Judaism is allowing itself to be subverted. When you have a Jewish community that goes to Israel with Harper, you're linking to really the most, in a way, benighted forces in your, a kind of a Christian fundamentalism that has nothing to do with even progressive Christianity, that also rejects human rights, rejects universalism for a kind of of a narrow, and what Jews don't understand, for the Christian fundamentalists of the Harper type, or the Pat Robertson types, or the John Hagee, that Netanyahu loves, the Texas preachers that bring billions to Israel and millions of visitors. I mean, now you've got this family association of Dobson, anti-Semitic, racist, terrible association of the states that's bringing the Republican National Committee to Israel. So Israel is now in league with, and the Jews are starting to be in league with, the darkest forces that we have in society. People that they would see as enemies, except real anti-Semites, real racists, real right-wing ideologues are pro-Israel, which should say something to us. And we get pulled into that. So somehow, to defend indefensible Israeli policies, we get in bed with Harper and with John Hagee and these types, which not only murders Judaism, but mutilates the body. I mean, there's nothing recognizable anymore. So I think Jews have to really understand that this uncritical support of Israel is not good for them. I understand where they're coming from a little bit. The whole idea is that if you criticize Israel, you're opening the door to anti-Semitism. But what they don't understand, I think, is that they themselves are in a sense undermining the whole. I mean, what are they saving? It's like in Vietnam, when you used to save the Vietnamese village by destroying it and imprisoning the people behind barbed wire. In order to save Judaism somehow, they're murdering it and putting it behind barbed wire, guarded by Christian fundamentalists, and somehow, and then then that's Judaism. It really isn't. So I would say that you have to be careful not to turn yourself into your own worst image. Your own. Everything that you oppose. And I think they have to distance themselves from Israel. You can't let Netanyahu stand up in the UN and say, I in Israel represent the Jewish people. I attacked Gaza in the name of the Jewish people. And he's confusing Jewish and Israeli. They're not the same thing. You're not an Israeli. He's never asked Jews if they're willing to be represented by Israel. And then, so the Jews, what the Jews have to do abroad is to say, no, not in my name. You don't represent us. Then they could make a legitimate claim to saying, look, if you're confusing us with Israeli policies, that's anti-Semitism. You're putting us all in one thing. You're making Israel represent us, and you're holding us like the attack in Paris. So you're attacking a kosher store to get at Israel. What do we have to do with Israel? We're Jews living in France or living in Canada. But if the Jewish community itself, and especially the organized Jewish community, accepts that and says, yes, Israel does represent us. We're not distancing ourselves. We identify with Israel. Israel is us. All right. Then you've made your bed. You go lie in it. Then don't expect people not to confuse Judaism and Israel. So if you are a Jew and you really think there are values of Judaism that you want to uphold, you can't. You've got to say to Israel, I wish you all the best, but you are a foreign country. Your policies are abhorrent to me as a Jew. And I don't want you, and no, you do not represent me. And to make that clear. You can't have it both ways.
Right. Something you discussed in your talk last night that was also quite concerning Israel and Canada was how there are Israeli training policies and policies that are actually coming into use in police forces, in security, in Canada and in other countries as well. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Well, I'm writing a book about that now. And that is that it's not only that Israel has become a terrible place for Palestinians and for human rights and so on, but it's exporting the occupation. This is something I think that we have to understand, that Israel has really joined the global military-industrial complex with both hands. So that if you look at the occupation, it's hard to explain why Israel didn't agree to the two-state solution. Two-state solution would have resolved this 27 years ago, in 1988, when Arafat formally accepted the two-state solution. That's a solution that Canada accepts, the US accepts, the international community accepts, the Arab League accepts. And it's a super pro-Israeli solution. Here, in the two-state solution, Israel gets peace, security, integration into the region, and 78% of the country. And the Israelis are going to be a minority in that country. So a minority population gets 78% of the land. And peace, and I mean, you want a better deal than that? I can't explain why Israel didn't grab that with both hands. We could have been 25 years into peace by now, except for the military. If you look at the occupied territories, not as the land of Israel, not as Judea and Samaria, but as a laboratory, as a resource. You know, the military homeland security industry is $1.5 trillion a year industry. And Israel's inserting itself right in the center, doing all kinds of joint development military programs with Europe and the US and NATO. Economically, the ability to develop weapons and tactics and security devices that they then export to Canada is a tremendous resource, economically, but also in terms of what I call security politics. If Israel didn't have the occupation, think about it, it would be New Zealand. It'd be some little country somewhere, nice to visit. It would not be an associate of NATO. It would not be the fourth largest nuclear power in the world. It wouldn't be a strategic ally of the United States. It would be a nice little country. But that's not Israel's image of itself. Israel wants the money of militarism. It wants the clout, the political clout that comes with being an ally of the United States and of Europe and all of that. So that, in a sense, its occupation is not only a resource, but it's an integral part of the superpower, the regional hegemon that Israel imagines itself to be. Completely the opposite of anything Jews would ever expect of a Jewish country. You know, we've talked about this for years, that Israel, instead of Athens, has become Sparta. It's Sparta, but exporting the occupation. So here in Canada, for example, in 2006, your Minister of Public Safety, Stockwell Day, signed what's called the Canada-Israel Public Safety Agreement. Public safety is internal. It invites Israel, with all the militarism and the security devices and everything tested and perfected on the Palestinians, to come into Canada and secure your prisons, secure your borders, train your police, secure your cities with all kinds of surveillance, your airports. In other words, Israel's exporting the occupation and you're importing it. So that I think that explains much more why Israel won't give up the occupation than settlements or the land of Israel or all of that. And it just Israel is at the center of the global capitalist, global north military industrial complex. And then the question is, now you as a Jewish community, that's who you're linking your culture to, your religion to, your lives to, is that? You know, I think people have to really understand that Israel's gone completely off the tracks. The only way to really ever try to bring it back is to end the occupation, which is the source of all evil, for Israel, for the Jews, and for everybody, not to mention the Palestinians, and to try to get to a just peace. I mean, it's much larger than just Israel-Palestine. It would really go a long way towards stabilizing the entire Middle East and really beginning to get militarism reduced.
One final question, Jeff. How can people who are concerned about the kinds of things that you're talking about, who are not in Israel but abroad, get involved and support you in the things that you do?
Well, I mean, there's a whole Israeli peace movement. So, you know, there's women's organizations like the Women's Coalition for Justice that has a BDS site called Who Profits. There's Rabbis for Human Rights. There's Yesh Gvul, which are reservists and breaking the silence, reservists that fight against the occupation. I mean, there's a whole Anarchists Against the Wall, the young people. There's a whole range of groups you can link to. We're the Israeli Committee Against House Demolitions. We do the work that I mentioned. We have a website, www.icahd.org. And, we have materials, and we're very happy to work with people. And we're thinking of the future. I mean, we're thinking beyond the two-state solution towards one democratic state in that area. So that I think we're not only resisting the occupation, we're not only explaining how it works, but we're also a group that I think is trying to strategically think about where are we going in terms of the future. So you're all invited to link up to us.
Great. Jeff, thank you very much for being with us today.
Okay, thanks for having me on.
For additional information about the situation in Israel and Palestine, the website haaretz.com is the world's largest English-language website for real-time news and analysis. B'Tselem.org is the Israeli Information Center for Human Rights in the occupied territories and offers news concerning human rights issues affecting both Israelis and Palestinians.